Eliza Harper knew the sound of a dry well. It was the sound of a hollow heart, a rope scraping rock and pulling up nothing but dust. She stood, a woman past 30 but feeling the grit of 100 winters in her bones, staring down the dark hole that had served Harper's Ridge for 2 decades. Now, it was just a hole, like the one in her life, like the one in her memory. It had been 5 years since the fire. 5 years since the night that smoke and screams had rolled down from the high country, taking her husband, Silas, and her boy, little Sammy. 5 years of silence. Harper's Ridge was a lonely place, perched on the edge of Arizona territory, staring into the vast, broken lands of the Navajo. Since that night, the door to her bedroom remained closed. It was the largest room in the small, sturdy ranch house Silas had built. The room where Sammy had been born. The room where she and Silas had dreamed of a future. Now, the doorknob was dull, the threshold thick with dust she refused to sweep away. She slept on a cot in the kitchen, near the dying embers of the hearth. The women in Half Moon Fork, the nearest town, whispered about it. They said Eliza Harper guarded her bed like a dragon guards gold. They were half right. She guarded it like a tomb. Eliza was a practical woman. She had to be. She ran the ranch with a single hired hand, a boy named Ben who was too young to shave but old enough to fear the shadows. She mended fences. She branded her few remaining cattle, and she faced the men at the bank in Half Moon Fork with a spine straight as a rifle barrel. They respected her for it. The townsfolk did. They also pitied her, and some, the ones who coveted her land, derided. A lone woman, holding onto a spread that bordered the Navajo Nation, with bandits and soldiers treating the land like a chessboard. It was unnatural, they said. The land itself was in turmoil. It was the 1870s, or maybe the 1880s were dawning. Eliza lost track. The air was thick with change, sharp as gunpowder. The Navajo, the Dine, were shadows on the hills, trying to piece their lives back together after the long walk, that terrible scar of forced removal and return. Their land had been carved up, their promises broken. The hatred from the white settlers in towns like Half Moon Fork was a palpable thing, a hot wind that smelled of mistrust. And now, the railroad was coming, slicing through the desert, bringing with it a new kind of greed. Men in suits who saw the land not for its beauty or its spirit, but for its water and its passages. Miles away, hidden in the high canyons, Tahan Nez watched the sun rise. He was a man caught between two worlds and belonging to neither. He wore the buckskins of his people, but his hair, though long and black, was cut in a way that spoke of his time with the blue coats. He had been a scout for the United States Army. He had done it not for the silver, but in the vain hope that by understanding the white man, by showing his worth, he could protect his own. It had been a bitter education. He had witnessed the lies, the treaties written in ink that vanished like water, the casual cruelty. His people respected his courage. He was Tahan, the warrior, but they suspected his time away. The elders, like his uncle Atsa, listened to his counsel with heavy hearts. The younger warriors, restless and hungry, saw the blue coat stain on him and spat when he spoke of peace. Tahan carried his own burdens. He carried the weight of the long walk, though he had been a child. But more, he carried the memory of a night 5 years past, a night of confusion, fire and gunfire, a clash near Harper's Ridge. He had been scouting for a column of soldiers, tracking a band of raiders, when the world had exploded. He never knew exactly what happened at the ranch house. Who struck the match? He only knew that in the chaos, a white woman's family had been slaughtered. He had been there. He had been part of the storm, and his guilt was a stone in his belly. He often found himself on this ridge, looking down at the small ranch, a silent, unseen sentinel. The source of the new greed had a name: Asa Pike. Pike was not a desert man. He was a man of ledgers and backroom deals. He smelled of cigars and city soap. He had come west with the railroad surveyors, and in a few short years, He had amassed a small empire of cattle and land, all bought with banknotes and leveraged promises. Pike wanted what everyone wanted: water. Specifically, he wanted Coyote Canyon. The canyon was a deep, winding scar in the earth. It held the only reliable stream for 50 miles, and it offered a natural pass through the mesas, a shortcut for the railroad, a perfect trail for cattle. But Coyote Canyon was difficult. It cut directly through land the Navajo considered sacred, and its mouth opened onto the edge of Eliza Harper's property. Asa Pike did not like difficulties. He preferred solutions. His solutions usually involved his hired men, a rough collection of drifters and hard cases known quietly as Pike's Riders. When a Navajo camp burned, the tracks left behind were always blamed on settlers. When a settler's barn was torched, the evidence always pointed to a Navajo raiding party. Pike kept his hands clean, but the country was growing bloodier. Eliza knew nothing of Tahan's vigil. Tahan knew nothing of Eliza's closed bedroom. But they were both standing on the same patch of crumbling earth, facing the same enemy, and they did not even know it. The drought was Eliza's immediate fight. The tax bill that had arrived from Prescott was the second. It had gone up, again, an impossible sum. She had ridden into Half Moon Fork, the letter tight in her fist. Sheriff Tom Hayes had avoided her eyes. He was a decent man, but weak, like coffee boiled too long. "It is the railroad. Eliza," he had mumbled, adjusting his belt. "Progress brings new assessments." "It brings thieves," she had said, her voice low. Asa Pike had been there, in the land office, looking over a map. He had turned, his smile smooth and practiced. "Mrs. Harper," he said, tipping his hat. "A difficult time for a woman alone. Perhaps you should consider my offer. A fair price for this dusty old ridge." Eliza had looked at his clean hands and felt a cold knot of fury. "My husband and son are buried on that ridge. Mr. Pike, I am not selling their graves." He had simply smiled, a flash of white teeth. "Graves do not pay taxes. The bank is not a sentimental creature." She had left, the tax bill still in her hand, the smell of his cigar clinging to her. That same afternoon, Tahan watched from the cliffs as Pike's men, the Riders, hammered wooden stakes into the ground near the entrance to Coyote Canyon. They were on Navajo land. They were marking the path. His uncle, Atsa, joined him. Atsa was an old man, his face a map of sorrow and endurance. "They are scarring the earth," Atsa said in their language. "They are pounding nails into the bones of our ancestors." "They follow the iron snake," Tahan said, his voice hard. "And Pike holds the leash." "The young ones want to fight," Atsa said, looking at his nephew. "They want to wash those stakes away with blood. If they fight, the blue coats will come." Tahan replied, the old guilt twisting in him. "They will come, and they will finish what the Long Walk started. Pike knows this. He is waiting for it, waiting." "Then what do we do?" "Scout," Atsa asked, the old name a gentle rebuke. "You have seen the white man's way. How do we fight a man who uses paper and soldiers as his weapons?" Tahan did not have an answer. He only watched the dust rising from Harper's Ridge in the distance, where a lone woman fought a drought, and he watched the men below him, who were stealing the water from them all. The air was dry, waiting for a spark. The land was holding its breath. The well was not just dry, it was a tomb for her hopes. Eliza Harper wiped the sweat from her brow with a dusty sleeve. Ben had taken the wagon into Half Moon Fork for what little feed they could afford. The cattle, thin and desperate, had scattered, seeking any patch of green in the parched landscape. 3 were missing. She knew where they would go. They would follow the scent of water, faint as it was, toward the deep cleft in the earth known as Coyote Canyon. Eliza saddled her mare, Bess, a sturdy buckskin that had been with her since before the fire. She checked the Winchester in its scabbard and the revolver at her hip. She was not a violent woman, but she was a survivor. The canyon was a place of uneasy spirits. The townsfolk avoided it, claiming it was haunted. The Navajo considered it sacred ground, a place where their ancestors slept. For Eliza, it was simply the only place left with a trickle of water. It was life. She rode out, the sun a hammer beating on the cracked earth. Harper's Ridge shrank behind her, a lonely outpost against a backdrop of red rock and endless, indifferent sky. As she neared the canyon's mouth, the air grew still, the temperature dropping a few precious degrees. The high, sheer walls of sandstone rose up, swallowing the light. The mare's hooves clicked nervously on the stone-littered trail. This was the source. This was what Asa Pike wanted. The stream, though low, was still running, a silver thread in the deep shadow. It was the artery of the valley. She found 2 of her cows drinking lazily at a bend in the stream. The third, a young heifer, was nowhere to be seen. Eliza sighed, dismounting to let Bess drink. She scanned the canyon walls. This place was beautiful. She admitted, in a terrifying, ancient way. It felt like a church, but one where she was not welcome. A pebble skittered down the rock face to her left. Eliza froze. Bess whinnied, sensing it before she did. "Well now, looky here," a rough voice echoed, seeming to come from all directions. "Got ourselves a visitor." 3 men on horseback emerged from a narrow side canyon, blocking the trail back. They were not Navajo. They were white men, their faces hidden by dirty bandanas. Pike's riders. She knew it instantly. "That's a fine piece of horseflesh you got there, ma'am." The leader, a big man with a greasy duster, said. He spat a stream of tobacco juice. "Mighty fine." Eliza's hand moved instinctively to the grip of her revolver. "I am looking for my cattle." "These here cattle," the man laughed, a harsh, grating sound. He gestured to her 2 cows. "I think you mean our cattle. This here canyon belongs to Mr. Pike now. There's a toll." "This is open land," Eliza said, her voice shaking only slightly. She forced it steady. "And this stream runs through my property line." "Not anymore." "It don't?" A second man, wiry and nervous-eyed, chimed in. "And besides, a pretty lady like you shouldn't be out here all alone. It's dangerous." He licked his lips, and his gaze traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "We could be convinced to escort you." "Get out of my way," Eliza said, drawing her revolver. The click of the hammer was unnaturally loud in the confined space. The leader's eyes hardened. "Feisty. I like that." He nodded to the third man. "Get her." The man spurred his horse, lunging for her. Eliza fired, the shot tearing through the silence, kicking up dirt near the horse's hooves. The animal screamed and reared, throwing its rider. The leader cursed, drawing his own gun. "You stupid woman." A sound, sharp as a whip crack, came from the rim of the canyon above them. An arrow. It embedded itself in the wooden stock of the leader's rifle, shattering the wood and tearing the gun from his grasp. Everyone looked up. A man stood silhouetted against the bright strip of sky. He was Navajo. He held a bow in one hand and a rifle in the other, and he seemed to have grown from the rock itself. Eliza's heart stopped. An Indian, a raider. The word screamed in her memory, bringing with it the smell of smoke and the image of dark figures on horseback. Her worst nightmare. The leader of Pike's men recovered first. "It's one of 'em, kill him." The man who had been thrown, now on his feet, raised his pistol and fired at the figure on the rim. The shot went wide. In response, a rifle shot barked from the cliff, precise and deadly. The man on the ground yelped and grabbed his shoulder, falling back as blood bloomed on his shirt. Tahan Nez moved then, not like a man, but like a shadow. He disappeared from the rim, and for a terrible moment, Eliza thought he was gone. Then, chaos erupted. He was using the canyon, the echoes, the rocks. A shot would ring out from the left, and as Pike's men turned to fire, Tahan would be on the right, his rifle speaking again. He was hurting them, pushing them, but not killing them. His shots were disabling, not fatal. One hit a man's canteen, showering him in his own water. Another hit the heel of a boot, sending the man stumbling. The two remaining riders, panicked and outmatched, turned their attention to Eliza. "She's in on it with him!" the leader roared, retrieving his fallen pistol. He spurred his horse directly at her. Eliza raised her revolver, but her hands were trembling, the ghost of her past rising up to choke her. She was frozen, seeing not this man, but the men from 5 years ago. A bullet struck the rock face beside her head, showering her with stone fragments. The impact snapped her back to the present. She dove behind Bess, using the mare for cover, and returned fire. For a few frantic moments, the canyon was a storm of noise, bullets ricocheting off the walls, men yelling, horses screaming. Eliza and the man on the ridge, though strangers, moved with an unconscious rhythm. When she was reloading, he would fire, drawing their attention. When his rifle fell silent, she would take a shot, forcing them to duck. It was a desperate, unplanned partnership, born of pure instinct. The leader of the riders, his face a mask of rage and fear, saw it was a losing fight. "This ain't worth it, let's go." He and the wiry man wheeled their horses, grabbing the reins of their wounded companion's mount. They galloped down the canyon, leaving the wounded man to scramble up behind the wiry one. They fled, the sound of their retreat swallowed by the stone. Silence fell, heavy and absolute, broken only by the panting of the mare and the drip of water from a rock. Eliza remained behind her horse, her revolver still raised, her knuckles white. She was shaking, not from fear of the men who had left, but from the one who remained. He descended the cliff face, moving with an impossible, fluid grace. He did not climb down. He seemed to flow. He reached the canyon floor and stood 20 yards from her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and held his rifle loosely at his side. He made no move toward her. Eliza stepped out from behind Bess, her pistol arm outstretched, the barrel aimed squarely at his chest. "Stay right there," she said, her voice a raw whisper. Tahan Nez looked at her. He saw the terror in her eyes, the hatred, and the tremor in her hand. He had seen that look on other white faces, but on hers, it felt like a fresh wound. "Do not shoot," he said. His voice was calm, deep, and his English was perfect, almost without accent. It was more jarring than if he had shouted a war cry. "You're one of them," she breathed, the memories flooding her. Smoke, fire, the shape of a man with a tomahawk. "Raiders?" "No," he said, holding her gaze. "The men who just tried to harm you were not my people." He took a half step, and she flinched, the gun wavering. He stopped. "They are the men of Asa Pike." The name was a slap. Eliza stared. "How do you know that name?" "Asa Pike wants this canyon," Tahan said, as if explaining something obvious to a child. "He wants the water. He wants a path for the Iron Snake. He pays those men to burn and to scare, and to blame my people. He thinks if he can start a war, the blue coats will come and clear the land for him, for his cattle, for his bank." Eliza was stunned into silence. This warrior. He spoke of railroads and banks. He knew Pike's plan, a plan she had only just begun to suspect. It made no sense. He was an Indian. He was supposed to be a savage, a ghost from the hills. Who are you?" she stammered. Tahan looked at her, and for a fleeting second, his mask of calm indifference cracked. A deep, profound sorrow passed through his dark eyes. He recognized her. He had seen her from a distance for 5 years. The widow of Harper's Ridge. "My name is Tahan Nez," he said. He did not explain what he had been, a scout, a man of 2 worlds. He did not explain the guilt he carried, the weight of that night. He could not. He only said, "You are the Harper woman." It was a statement, not a question. The way he said it made the hair on her arms stand up. He knew her. Eliza lowered the pistol. Just an inch. The confusion was overwhelming the fear. You saved me. We saved each other, he corrected, his gaze flickering to the spot where her shot had forced the leader to duck. He respected that. Why? She asked, the question small. Why help me? Tahan looked at the stream, then back at her. Pike is my enemy. He is your enemy. Today, our fight was the same. He slung his rifle over his shoulder, a gesture of peace, but he did not smile. He turned to leave, then paused. Do not come back to this canyon alone. Mrs. Harper, he said. His voice was low. A warning, but not a threat. And do not trust the pretty words of men in clean city suits. He began to walk up the canyon, not toward the trail she had come, but deeper into the Navajo lands. He moved without a sound, and in moments, he rounded a bend and was gone. He vanished as if the rocks had simply reclaimed him. Eliza stood alone, the adrenaline draining away, leaving her weak and trembling. Her 2 cows were grazing peacefully by the stream, undisturbed. She holstered her revolver, her hand numb. She mounted Bess, her mind a whirlwind. She had come here fearing a ghost, and instead had been rescued by a man who looked like her nightmare, but who spoke like a prophet. A man who knew Asa Pike, a man who knew her. She rode back to Harper's Ridge, the 2 cows trailing behind her. The sun was setting, painting the sky in violent shades of blood red and bruised purple. That night, she did not sleep on the cot in the kitchen. She found herself standing outside the closed door of her bedroom. She put her hand on the cold, dusty knob, but she could not turn it. The fortress of her grief, the one she had so carefully guarded, had just been breached. Not by an enemy, but by a rescuer who, in his own way, was just as terrifying. She was grateful to be alive, and she was terrified of the man who had saved her. She hated him for being what he was. She was indebted to him for what he had done. The conflict had begun, not in the canyon, but inside her own locked-up heart. The 3 days that followed the canyon encounter were a torment for Eliza. She had not told Ben, had not told anyone. She had, however, cleaned the wounded man's blood off her cow's flank, a grim reminder that the attack was real. But the man who had saved her, Tahan Nez, occupied her thoughts more than the men who had attacked. His words echoed in the silence of the ranch. He wants a path for the iron snake. Do not trust the pretty words of men in clean city suits. He was an Indian, a warrior, and he knew of railroads and banks. He was the specter from her nightmares. Yet he had saved her life. The paradox was a stone in her gut. She had spent 5 years hating the shadows he represented, and in one afternoon, that certainty had been shattered. She found herself sweeping the dust from the threshold of her bedroom, only to stop, disgusted with her own hands, leaving the task half finished. On the 4th day, Sheriff Tom Hayes rode out to the ranch. He was a man who looked perpetually apologetic. His shoulders slumped under the weight of a badge he seemed too small to wear. Eliza, he said, twisting the brim of his hat. There is to be a town meeting, this evening, at Maggie's place, the saloon. I have work to do. Tom, Eliza said, her voice flat. She was mending a harness strap, and she did not look up. Mr. Pike is insistent, the sheriff continued, his eyes darting to the barren fields around them. He says it concerns all landholders. He specifically mentioned you should be there. He said it was for your own good. My own good, Eliza repeated, the words tasting like ash, or Mr. Pike's. Now, Eliza, he is bringing progress. He has a man with him, from the railroad, all the way from back east. He cleared his throat. It would be noted if you did not attend. It was a summons, not an invitation, a threat wrapped in polite concern. I will be there, she said, finally looking up. Her gaze was cold and hard, and it made the sheriff flinch. Good, he said, relieved. That is good. He mounted his horse quickly and rode away, looking like a man fleeing a ghost. That evening, Eliza rode Bess into Half Moon Fork. The town was little more than one dusty main street, a collection of false-fronted buildings huddled against the vast emptiness. The saloon, run by Maggie, was the town's heart. It was a place Eliza had not set foot in since Silas was alive. She pushed open the bat-wing doors. The room, usually filled with the raucous noise of prospectors and cowhands, was packed with the town's respectable citizens, farmers, the blacksmith, the general store owner, and their wives, all seated on benches brought in for the occasion. The air was thick with cigar smoke and the nervous energy of anticipation. Maggie saw her first. She was a large woman, with red hair and a face that had seen too much but forgotten nothing. She gave Eliza a sharp, supportive nod and gestured to a spot at the bar, away from the main crowd. Eliza was grateful for the small anchor in the hostile sea. At the front of the room, on a small, makeshift stage, stood Asa Pike. He was immaculate in a dark suit and a string tie. He looked, Eliza thought, entirely out of place, like a vulture dressed as a preacher. Beside him sat Sheriff Hayes, looking miserable, and another man. This new man was thin, with spectacles and a pinched face. He radiated an air of impatient authority. Pike raised his hands for silence. His voice was smooth, oiled, and carried easily. Friends, neighbors, welcome. A new day is dawning for Half Moon Fork, a day of prosperity. He spoke for 10 minutes, his words painting a beautiful picture. He spoke of a grand Pike cattle trail, which would connect the vast grazing lands of the territory to the eastbound railroad. "And where will this trail go?" someone shouted. Pike smiled. "Progress requires passage the most logical, most direct, and most water-rich route," he said, tapping a large, rolled-up map. "Is through Coyote Canyon." A murmur went through the crowd. That was Navajo land. That was Harper land. "Now, I know what you are thinking," Pike said, holding up a placating hand. "This development will require the cooperation of all parties. The railroad, represented here by Mr. Sutton of the Atlantic and Pacific Line, is prepared to compensate landowners fairly, generously. Even we will purchase the necessary rights of way, bringing silver dollars to every pocket." He unrolled the map. A thick red line slashed across the landscape, cutting right through the canyon and clipping the edge of a property marked Harper's Ridge. "This project," Pike continued, his voice hardening just a fraction, "will benefit everyone. It will bring jobs. It will bring a depot. It will bring civilization. The only thing standing in our way is stubbornness, old claims, and certain legal complications." His eyes found Eliza. She felt her stomach drop. "We have been in communication with the Territorial Land Office in Prescott," Pike said, his tone shifting to one of faint regret. "Mr. Sutton's lawyers, in doing their due diligence, have uncovered a most unfortunate matter. It concerns the title to the Harper's Ridge property." The room went silent. Eliza could feel every eye in the room on her. Maggie moved to stand just behind her, a solid, warm presence. "It seems," Pike said, consulting a paper, "that the original homestead claim, filed by the late Silas Harper, is in dispute. It appears his name and his signature are on documents related to several illicit armed clashes, unauthorized militia actions against the native populace." Eliza's blood ran cold. She had never heard this. Silas, an outlaw. "What are you saying? Pike!" someone called out. "I am saying," Pike said, his voice ringing with false sympathy, "that the government has a very dim view of men who take the law into their own hands and stir up trouble. The land office is of the opinion that Mr. Harper's title was obtained under false pretenses, that his actions voided the claim. The state, my friends, the state is preparing to seize the land." Eliza felt the floor drop away. She grabbed the bar to steady herself. Seize the land, her home. "It is a tragedy," Pike boomed. To see a widow lose her home, which is why Mr. Sutton and I— He gestured to the railroad man, who just nodded grimly. Are prepared to step in. We will offer Mrs. Harper a nominal fee for her troubles, and take this problematic land off her hands. We will absorb the legal troubles, and in return, the town gets its cattle trail. A clean solution for everyone. The room exploded. Not in support of her, but in a wave of relieved self-interest. They saw their depot, their jobs. Eliza was just the sacrifice. She saw the looks. The pity was gone. The respect was gone. She was no longer the brave widow. She was the outlaw's wife. The woman standing in the way of progress. The source of a legal infection that might spoil everything. She turned and fled, pushing through the doors. Maggie calling her name. She did not stop. Miles away. In the high, cold air of the mesas, Tahan Nez stood with his uncle. Atsa was a thin, hard man. His face a web of wrinkles that held the history of his people. They were looking at the wooden stakes Pike's men had driven into the earth near the mouth of the sacred canyon. A young warrior, Hastin, his face painted in anger, rode up, his horse lathered. He had been watching Half Moon Fork. They mean to do it, Hastian said in their language, his voice tight. The suit man, Pike, he told the whole town. He will drive his cattle trail through the canyon. He will build a house for the Iron Snake. Atsa closed his eyes. And the graves? He will plow over them, Hastian spat. He will break the bones of our grandfathers to make a path for his fat cows. The other young warriors who had gathered murmured, their hands tightening on their knives and rifles. We must fight, Hastian said, turning to Tahan. You know their ways, you know their weapons. We must strike them now, burn their town, drive them out. And what then? Tahan's voice was quiet, but it cut through the anger. You burn the town, and the blue coats come. Not a dozen, like we have seen, but hundreds. With cannons, they will hunt us, and they will put us back in the pens, or in the ground. Is that the victory you want? It is better than watching them spit on our ancestors. No, Atsa said, his voice a dry rustle. We will talk. I will go to the fort. I will show them the paper, the one from Washington. It says, this is our land. Their paper is wind, Hastian scoffed. Tahan knows he was their dog, their scout. Tell him, Tahan, tell him their paper means nothing. Tahan looked at the stake, at the raw, scarred earth. He was trapped. He knew Hastian was right about the paper. It was meaningless. But he knew his uncle was right about the blue coats. To fight was suicide. To negotiate was to beg. He felt a wave of disgust at the white men, at his own people's powerlessness, and at himself, for understanding both sides too well. We must be smart, Tahan said, his voice weary. Pike wants us to fight. He is baiting us. A single dead white man will be his excuse to take everything. So we do nothing, Hastian sneered. I did not say that, Tahan said, his eyes turning cold. We do not fight his war. We fight our own. Back in Half Moon Fork, Eliza had not fled. She had stumbled out of the saloon, gasping for air, but had stopped in the deep shadow of the alleyway between Maggie's and the general store. She was leaning against the rough-hewn boards, trying to process the words. Silas, an outlaw. She heard the saloon doors open again. Asa Pike, Mr. Sutton, and Sheriff Hayes came out, standing on the boardwalk, lit by the lantern light. That went well, Sutton said, his voice pinched and high. The widow looked suitably crushed. You are sure this title claim will hold up? Pike laughed, a low, ugly sound. It does not have to hold up, he said, lighting a cigar. It only has to stall. The threat is all I need, but it is not enough. What do you mean? Sutton asked nervously. The woman is stubborn, Pike said, and the Navajo are quiet, too quiet. We need to force the issue. The railroad cannot invest with a potential Indian war brewing. Then what do we do? Sheriff Hayes asked, his voice weak. We provide the incentive, Pike said. I need the military here. Sheriff, not just your badge. I need a troop of cavalry protecting our surveyors. And the army does not move for land disputes. It moves for blood. Eliza clamped her hand over her mouth. I need an incident. Gentlemen, Pike said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. A few of my riders will push some Navajo cattle onto the Harper Ranch. Another group will respond. A few shots fired in the night. Maybe the widow's barn burns down. Tragic. The work, clearly, of savage raiders, angry about the cattle trail. He puffed on his cigar, the end glowing red. The sheriff here, he clapped Hayes on the back, will send an urgent telegram to the fort. Settlers under attack, Navajo on the warpath. The cavalry will be here by the end of the week to restore order. The Navajo will be confined to their lands. The widow will be terrified and bankrupt, and she will sign her land over to me for pennies. Clean. Simple. Sutton looked pale. That is risky, Pike. Progress is always risky. Mr. Sutton, Pike said. But the rewards are immense. Eliza slid back into the darkness, her heart hammering not with fear, but with a cold, terrifying clarity. Tahan Nez was right. He had been right about everything. The man in the clean suit, with the pretty words, was the true savage. She realized, with a sinking dread, that her problem was not a legal paper in Prescott. Her problem, and the Navajo's problem, were one and the same. They were just two different kinds of inconvenience, standing in Asa Pike's way, and he intended to remove them both. Eliza did not ride home. She remained hidden in the darkness of Half Moon Fork, her heart a cold stone, until Pike and his associates had finished their celebratory drinks and vanished into the night. The town settled, but for Eliza, the world had fractured. Silas, her husband, the man she had mourned, was not just a victim. He was part of the sickness. And Asa Pike, the man of progress, was a murderer in waiting. She slipped out of the alley, mounted Bess, and rode not south toward her ranch, but west toward the jagged line of the mesas, toward the border of the Navajo lands. She rode with the cold, clear terror of Pike's words echoing in her mind. A few shots fired in the night. Maybe the widow's barn burns down. Tragic. He was going to use her as a sacrifice. He was going to use her ranch, her name, to start a war. The moon was a thin sliver, offering little light. She rode on pure instinct, guided by the silhouette of the high rocks. She was riding toward the one man who had told her the truth, even though he was the man her entire world had taught her to fear. She was riding to find Tahan Nez. As the sky began to pale from black to a bruised purple, she reached the unmarked border. It was not a fence, but a change in the land. The flat scrub gave way to canyons, washes, and the silent, watching stones. She was a white woman, alone, riding into territory where she was not just unwelcome, but where she was the enemy. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every rustle of wind sounded like a whispered warning. This was a profound act of desperation, a step across a line from which she knew she could not return. She rode for another hour as the sun began to cast long, morning shadows. She was exhausted, parched, and terrified. But she was more afraid of Asa Pike than she was of the phantoms in these hills. They found her. She did not see them until they were simply there. 3 Navajo warriors, mounted on wiry ponies, emerged from a dry wash. They did not wear war paint, but they were armed with rifles, and their faces were hard, unreadable masks. They formed a silent line in front of her, blocking her path. Bess shied. Sensing the tension, Eliza reined her in, her heart hammering against her ribs. She remembered the men who had attacked her in the canyon, and for a moment, her resolve faltered. I am looking for Tahan Nez, she said, Her voice was dry, cracking. The men just watched her. Their eyes were flat, holding generations of mistrust. One of them, a young man with a look of fierce anger, Hastian, spoke to his companions in their language, his words sharp and dismissive. He gestured to her, then to the town, clearly seeing her as just another trespasser. "You are lost, white woman," Hastian said in harsh, accented English. "This is not your land. Go back." "I am not lost," Eliza said, forcing strength into her voice. "I have information. It concerns Asa Pike." At the mention of that name, the men's eyes narrowed, but the hostility did not lessen. "We know of Pike," Hastian said, nudging his pony closer. "He is your people's thief." "He is not my people," Eliza said, her voice rising. "He is my enemy. He is our enemy." "We have no hour with you," Hastian spat. "He is going to burn my ranch," Eliza said, the words tumbling out, desperate. "He is going to blame your people. He is trying to start a war. He wants the cavalry to come. He told them." The men exchanged a look. This was new information, but the anger remained. "Why do you come here?" another warrior asked. Older, his voice calmer. "To warn us, or to save your own skin?" "Both," Eliza said, honestly. "He wants to take my land. He wants to take your canyon. I need to speak to Tahan Nez. He helped me. He understood." "Tahan," Hastian sneered. "He understands the white man too well. He is not here." "He is here." The voice came from the rocks above them. Tahan Nez stepped out, standing on a ledge, just as he had in the canyon. He was close enough to have heard everything. He looked down, his face impossible to read, with a lithe movement. He descended the trail and stood before the other warriors, who parted for him, though Hastian did so with visible reluctance. Tahan looked at Eliza. He saw the exhaustion, the fear, and the new, hard glint of resolve in her eyes. He saw the woman who had fled the saloon meeting, but who had not run home. "You are far from your ranch, Mrs. Harper," he said, his voice as calm and deep as she remembered. "They are going to take it," she said, cutting straight to the point. "Pike. He told them. He said my husband's land title is worthless. He said Silas was part of a militia. The shame of it, saying it aloud, burned her throat. He is going to use that to take my land, and he is going to stage an attack, burn my barn, and blame your warriors to bring the army." Tahan's face remained impassive, but a muscle in his jaw tightened. He turned to the other warriors and spoke in Navajo, his voice low and rapid. Eliza could not understand the words, but she heard the authority. She heard the dissent from Hastian, and she heard Tahan's sharp, final reply. Hastian shot her a look of pure hatred, then wheeled his pony and rode away. Fast. The other two warriors looked at Tahan, then at Eliza, and with a quiet dignity, they turned their horses and followed, leaving Tahan and Eliza alone in the vast, silent landscape. "You should not have come," Tahan said, turning back to her. "You are not safe here." "I am not safe in my own home," she retorted, her fear giving way to anger. "You said we had the same enemy. I heard him, Tahan. I heard the plan. He wants Coyote Canyon. He wants to clear it. And he will use my blood and your blood to do it." Tahan studied her, his gaze intense. "You are one woman. What can you do?" "I can read," Eliza said, her hands fisting on the reins. "I can write. I understand their papers. You can fight. I am here to make a bargain." For a long moment, Tahan was silent. He saw the courage it took for her to be here. He also saw the naivete, but he saw, too, a flicker of something else, a weapon. "Come," he said, turning his back to her. "We will talk where the rocks do not have white men's ears." He led her not to a camp, but to a small, hidden alcove, a hollow in the rock where a seep spring nourished a single, ancient cottonwood tree, a fire, small and smokeless, was burning in a ring of blackened stones. It was a place he used for solitude. He motioned for her to dismount and sit. She did, her legs trembling. He offered her a water skin. She drank, the water tasting of leather and minerals, but it was the best water she had ever tasted. He sat across the small fire from her, not too close, and waited. "Tell me," he said. Eliza told him everything. She told him about the meeting, about Pike's accusation against Silas. As she spoke of her husband's secret, her voice wavered, a cocktail of shame and fresh grief. Tahan watched her, his expression unchanged, but he listened. He listened as she recounted the conversation she had overheard in the alley, the staged attack, the barn, the cavalry. When she finished, the silence was heavy. "So you see," she said, her voice thin, "he is playing us against each other. He has been doing so for years," Tahan said, his voice a low rumble. "This is not new, Mrs. Harper. It is just the first time you have been on this side of the lie." The words stung, because they were true. She felt a flush of defensiveness, but she swallowed it. "What did you mean in the canyon? You said Silas. You said my husband's name was on papers." She fumbled in her saddlebag, pulling out a folded, oilskin-wrapped bundle. "This was his," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She unfolded a map, a hand-drawn survey of Harper's Ridge and the surrounding lands. In the corner was a small, embossed seal, a circle with the image of a hawk and the letters SH. He was a proud man. He had this made, a hawk, for Harper. She pushed it across the small space between them. Tahan did not move to take it at first. His eyes were fixed on the seal. Eliza watched as his face, for the first time, showed a powerful, raw emotion, a flicker of something dark, a violent memory. His jaw went rigid. He reached out a hand, his fingers, strong and calloused, tracing the image of the hawk. He was not seeing her map. He was seeing something else. Eliza watched him, her breath catching. "What is it? What do you see?" Tahan's hand clenched into a fist, crushing the corner of the map. He looked up, his eyes black, holding an ocean of pain she could not understand. "This mark," he said, his voice thick. "I have seen it, on a rifle stock. The night of the fire." He said no more, but he did not have to. Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. Silas, her Silas, had not just been a victim. He had been a participant, the man who had given her a son, who had built her home, had ridden out with a hawk on his rifle. Tahan released the map, pushing it back to her, and stood abruptly. Turning his back, he was fighting for control, and she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Pike's plan will work," he said, his voice flat, all emotion carefully scrubbed from it. "He will burn your barn. The sheriff will send for the soldiers. The soldiers will come, and they will listen to Pike. They will not listen to a dead woman, and they will not listen to an Indian." "Then we have to stop them," Eliza said, rising to her feet. "We have to prove he is the one. I can go to Prescott. I can challenge the land claim. I can tell the army what I heard." Tahan laughed, a short, bitter sound. "And who will protect your ranch while you are gone? Who will believe you? You are the widow of a known raider, and I am the savage he was hunting. We have no standing. Mrs. Harper, no law." "Then what do we do?" she cried, her desperation returning. "Do we just let him win?" Tahan turned to face her. The firelight played across the hard planes of his face. For the first time, his eyes were not cold. They were burning. "No," he said. "We do not let him win, but we do not play his game. You are right. You have papers. I have warriors. We will make a bargain. A real one." He stepped closer, and she had to tilt her head back to look at him. He was so tall, so different, and yet, in that moment, he was the only person on earth she could trust. "Here is the deal," Tahan said, his voice low. You will not go to Prescott. You will stay on your ranch. You will write. You will use your papers, your knowledge of their laws. You will find the lie in Pike's claim. You will be the voice that speaks to the white world, but you will do it from your home. And you, she whispered. He said, will be the shadow. My men will watch your ranch. They will watch Pike. When his raiders come to burn your barn, they will not find a helpless woman. They will find us. You would do that? Eliza asked, stunned. Protect my ranch. Harper's Ridge is the buffer, Tahan said, his voice practical, cold again. It is the wall between Pike and the canyon. I am not protecting you, Mrs. Harper. I am protecting the graves of my ancestors. Your ranch is simply the battlefield. The coldness was a strange comfort. It was honest. This was not charity. It was a military alliance. All right, she said, nodding, her mind racing. A bargain. Go home. Now, before the sun is high. Eliza mounted Bess. She looked at him one last time. This man of contradictions, her savior, her ally, and the man who carried the secret of her husband's death. Tahan, she said, thank you. Do not thank me, he replied, his face unmoving. Just read your papers, Mrs. Harper, and keep your rifle loaded. She nodded, turned Bess, and rode toward home, the weight of the alliance settling on her shoulders like a shroud. She did not feel safe. She felt, instead, like she had just struck a match in a room full of dynamite. That night, back in her own small kitchen, she brought Tahan a cup of coffee. He had appeared at dusk, a silent shadow, and had taken up a watch position on her porch. He took the cup without a word, his fingers brushing hers, sending an unwelcome jolt through her. She retreated inside, but she found herself pacing near the front room window. She watched his silhouette, a man of stone, watching her property. She walked past the door to her bedroom, the door that had been locked for 5 years. She paused, her hand on the knob. She was terrified of Asa Pike. She was terrified of the cavalry. But as she stood there, she realized she was also, unaccountably, terrified of the man sitting on her porch. He was a warrior, a protector, and he was the first man she had willingly invited into her space, even if it was just the porch. She left the door closed, but that night, as she lay on her cot in the kitchen, she did not dream of the fire. She dreamed of a hawk on a rifle, and the feeling of strong, calloused fingers brushing her own. She woke up in a cold sweat, her heart hammering, caught between the ghosts of her past and the terrifying, living presence of her future. The alliance had been made, but the cost, she knew, was only just beginning to be counted. Asa Pike did not wait long. His plan, rooted in arrogance, assumed his opponents were either stupid or weak. He had underestimated both the widow and the warrior. 3 nights after Eliza's meeting with Tahan, the fragile peace of the ranch shattered. It began not with a shout, but with a sudden, unnatural glow. Eliza, sleeping lightly on her cot, sat bolt upright. An angry, orange light flickered against the kitchen walls. "Ben!" she screamed, her heart leaping into her throat. She grabbed the rifle she now kept beside the cot. "Fire!" She burst through the front door into a nightmare. The main barn, the one holding her last stores of winter hay, was already a roaring inferno. Flames shot 50 feet into the black sky, a beacon of destruction. Ben, the young hired hand, stumbled out of the bunkhouse, pulling on his trousers, his eyes wide with terror. "Lord God, Mrs. Harper, the barn!" "Get the horses from the corral," she yelled, her mind screaming, "Pike, it is happening," just as he said. Then a rifle cracked from the darkness. The bullet did not come from the direction of the fire. It came from the rocks to the west, whining past Eliza's ear and slamming into the door frame beside her head. They were not just burning the barn. They were here to kill her. "Get down!" a voice roared. a deep command that was not Ben's. The night exploded. Before Eliza could even register the new voice, a second shot came from the rocks, aimed at Ben. But the boy was saved by a shadow that seemed to detach itself from the corner of the house. Tahan Nez, moving with impossible speed, tackled Ben, throwing them both to the ground as the bullet split the air where they had been. "They are in the rocks," Tahan yelled, already on one knee, his own rifle barking in response. "To the house! Get to the house!" From the darkness near the creek bed, 2 more rifles opened up. Tahan had not come alone. His warriors, invisible until this moment, had been watching. They were here. "Pike's riders!" Ben gasped, scrambling on all fours toward the porch. "There must be 6 of them!" Eliza dropped to one knee, the wood of the porch biting into her skin, and raised her rifle. She was no longer a victim. She was a soldier in a war she had not chosen. She sighted on a muzzle flash near the woodpile and squeezed the trigger. The gun kicked hard against her shoulder. The night became a chaos of noise, the roar of the fire, the screaming of terrified horses in the corral, the sharp exchange of gunfire, and, chillingly, the high, ululating cry of one of Tahan's warriors, a sound that seemed to tear the night apart. Pike's men were caught in a trap. They had expected to pick off a terrified widow and a sleeping boy while the barn burned. They had not expected a disciplined, invisible defense. Tahan and his men were not just shooting, they were hunting. They moved. A shot from the creek, then a shot from the side of the house, then one from the roof of the bunkhouse. They were everywhere, their accuracy terrifying. A man screamed from the rocks, a short, wet sound that was cut off abruptly. "You keep them pinned," Tahan shouted to Eliza. He saw she was holding her own, reloading and firing with a steady, desperate rhythm. The fight lasted less than 5 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. Faced with a defense they could not see and a ferocity they could not match, Pike's men broke. "It is a trap, pull back!" a voice yelled, thick with panic. The gunfire from the rocks ceased, replaced by the frantic sound of men scrambling for their horses. Hoofbeats thudded, fading rapidly into the darkness. Silence fell, sudden and absolute, broken only by the crackle and roar of the burning barn. "They are gone," Tahan said, his voice low, appearing at her side as if from the earth itself. He was breathing hard, his bare chest glistening with sweat in the firelight. "The barn," Eliza whispered, her rifle sinking. The structure was already collapsing, a shower of sparks rising to the heavens, her last bit of security. Gone. Ben was slumped against the wall, shaking. They were here to kill us all." "They failed," Tahan said, his eyes on the fire. "They will be back." Eliza's gaze fell on him. In the hellish light of the flames, she saw a dark, wet stain spreading across his left shoulder. "You are hit," she said, the words numb. Tahan glanced down, as if the wound was a minor annoyance. "A graze." "It is not a graze," Eliza said, her voice sharp, cutting through her own shock. She stepped closer. It was a deep, ragged tear. A bullet had passed clean through the fleshy part of the shoulder, and it was bleeding. A lot. "Ben, get the lantern from the kitchen, and the whiskey, the good one." "Mrs. Harper, I am fine," Tahan said, starting to move back toward the shadows. "The hell you are," Eliza snapped, her fear replaced by a cold, practical anger. "You just saved my life. You saved my home. You are not going to bleed to death in my yard. Get inside, now!" Ben, startled by her tone, scrambled to his feet and ran into the house. Tahan looked at this small, soot-streaked woman, her eyes blazing in the firelight, and he saw a core of steel he had not fully appreciated. He nodded. Once. She grabbed his arm to steady him, her hand warm on his skin. He was strong, but she could feel a slight tremor as the adrenaline began to fade. Ben held the lantern as they came into the kitchen. The light was weak, and the wind, which had fanned the fire, was now whistling through the cracks in the door, making the lantern flame gutter. "It is too cold in here," Eliza said, her mind racing. "The wind will get dirt in it. We cannot do it here." Ben's eyes were wide as he looked at the Navajo warrior, bleeding in their kitchen. "Mrs. Harper, what will the neighbors say?" Eliza looked at the boy, her gaze withering. "The neighbors are asleep in their beds. Ben, this man is not—" "Now go boil water, lots of it." She looked at Tahan. His face was pale beneath its bronze, and a line of pain was etched around his mouth. The kitchen was not right. It was not clean. It was not still. There was only one other place. She turned and walked to the closed door at the end of the hall, the door to her bedroom. Her hand hovered over the knob, which was dull with 5 years of dust. This was a betrayal. This was the tomb. This was the one place no man had entered since Silas. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. She felt a wave of guilt, of cold fear, as if Silas's ghost were standing right behind her. This is a raider, a savage. And then she heard Tahan shift behind her, a small grunt of pain he could not suppress. She looked back. He was a man, bleeding on her floor, a man who had stood between her and death. Pike had tried to burn her out. This man had been her shield. Her fear of the past was real, but her fear of the present was greater. She gripped the cold, dusty knob. This is the only room that is warm. The wind does not get in here." She turned the key in the lock. The sound of the mechanism, rusty and stiff, was a shriek in the quiet house. The door creaked open, releasing the stale, cold air of memory. She looked at Tahan. "In here?" She held the lantern high. He stepped past her, over the threshold. Her heart gave a painful lurch. A tall, broad, half-naked warrior, standing in the center of her locked-away life. The room was simple, a large wooden bed, a single chair, a dresser, and in the corner, a small, heartbreakingly empty rocking chair. Tahan did not look at the bed. He did not look at the rocker. His eyes met hers. He understood. In that instant, what this room was, he had stepped onto sacred ground. He unlaced his moccasins and, to her astonishment, he slipped them off, leaving them at the door. He walked, barefoot, across the wooden floor and sat in the single, hard-backed chair she pointed to, placing his rifle gently on the floor beside him. He did not lean back. He did not touch anything. He just sat, waiting, a model of profound, unexpected respect. Eliza felt her prejudice shatter. This was not the act of a savage. "Ben," she called, her voice shaking slightly. "Bring the water and the sewing kit, and then you will stand watch on the porch. If you see anything, you'll fire twice. Go!" She needed to be alone for this. Ben brought the supplies. His eyes averted and fled, closing the door behind him. The room was suddenly small, intimate, and silent, save for the whistling wind outside and Tahan's steady, quiet breathing. "This will sting," she said, pouring whiskey from the bottle directly onto the wound. Tahan's entire body went rigid. His hands gripped the seat of the chair, his knuckles white. A low hiss escaped his teeth, but he made no other sound. "You have done this before," she stated, not a question, as she began to clean the wound with a boiled cloth. "And you," he replied, his voice strained. She threaded the needle. Her hands, to her surprise, were perfectly steady. "Hold still." She began to sew. The work was close, intimate. She had to lean in, her face just inches from his shoulder. She could feel the heat of his skin, the smell of him, smoke, sweat, and something else, something clean and wild, like pine and crushed sage. She was intensely aware of his breathing, the rise and fall of his chest, the muscles tensing under her fingers. He watched her. He did not flinch as the needle went in and out. He simply watched her face. his gaze dark and unreadable in the lantern light. He watched her frown of concentration, the stray strands of hair plastered to her temple with sweat, the pulse that beat steadily in her throat. She worked in silence, the only sound the pull of the thread through skin. She was a practical woman, and this was practical work. But her heart was a chaos of sensations. This man was a stranger, an Indian, the very symbol of her deepest fears. And yet she was touching him, mending him, her hands covered in his blood. She tied off the last stitch and reached for the bandages. And as she did, the adrenaline that had held her together for the entire night finally, catastrophically, abandoned her. Her hands began to shake. The needle slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. It is done," she whispered. But she did not move away. A single hot tear rolled down her sooty cheek and splashed onto his arm. Then another. "Why do you weep?" he asked, his voice low, rough. "You are safe. The house is safe." "He will come back," she choked out, her voice breaking. "Pike, he will keep coming back until I am dead or gone, and I am so tired." She covered her face with her hands, and the dam of 5 years of carefully guarded grief burst. The sobs came from a place so deep inside her she did not recognize them. They were not the quiet tears of a widow. They were the raw, tearing, animal sounds of pure desolation. "I am all alone," she wept, her shoulders shaking. "He killed my husband. He killed my boy, my little Sammy. He was just a baby." She was confessing it all. To this man. The grief she had never shown the town. The pain she had locked in this very room. "And I locked it," she gasped, her words tumbling out, incoherent. "I locked the door. I locked this bed. I cannot let anyone in. I am so afraid. I am so afraid." She collapsed, kneeling on the floor, her head bent, the sobs racking her small frame. Tahan was still for a long moment. He looked at her, this broken woman, and he saw a mirror of his own people's pain. He saw a survivor, armored in grief, who had finally reached her breaking point. He stood, the movement pained but fluid, and knelt in front of her. He did not speak. He did not offer empty comforts. He reached out his good hand and placed it gently on her head, his fingers spreading through her tangled, sweat-dampened hair. The touch was not one of passion. It was one of grounding, a simple, physical statement. "You are not alone in this room." Eliza froze, her sobs catching in her throat. His hand was large, warm, and heavy. It was the first gentle human touch she had felt in 5 years. She slowly, tentatively, raised her head. Her face was a ruin, streaked with tears and soot. She looked at him through her blurred vision. He did not look like a savage. He did not look like a warrior. He looked like a man, his dark eyes filled with a profound, shared sorrow that needed no words. He moved his hand, his rough thumb brushing a tear from her cheek. The gesture was so tender, so unexpected. It broke her heart all over again, but in a different way. She leaned into his palm, a small, desperate movement, like a starving animal finding an unlooked-for kindness. He cupped her jaw, his gaze holding hers, and he asked her a question, not with his voice, but with his eyes. "May I?" She did not know how she answered. Perhaps she nodded. Perhaps her eyes, so full of pain, simply gave him the permission he sought. She was so tired of fighting. He leaned in, his own face streaked with her tears, and he pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was slow and deep and as gentle as a prayer. It was not a kiss of demand, it was a kiss of giving. It tasted of smoke and whiskey and salt. He was not trying to take her. He was trying to give her back to herself. He kissed away the tears on her lips. He kissed away the sorrow that clung to her like a shroud. He poured all his own silent, ancient pain into that one gesture. And in doing so, he absorbed hers. It was a kiss that said, "I see your grief. I am not afraid of it. Isa's hands, which had been clenched at her sides, slowly uncurled. She found herself raising them, not to push him away, but to hold on. Her fingers grasped his uninjured shoulder, clinging to him as if he were the only solid thing in a world that was burning down. He did not deepen the kiss. He did not try for more. He simply held her, his lips a warm, healing presence, until her shaking began to subside, until her breath, which had been coming in ragged gasps, finally steadied. He pulled back, slowly, resting his forehead against hers. They knelt there, on the floor of her tomb, both of them breathing hard, both of them trembling. "You are not alone," he whispered, the words a promise. She looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time, not as an Indian, not as an ally, but as Tahan. She started, but she had no words. He helped her to her feet. She was exhausted, drained, her legs unsteady. He, too, was weakened from blood loss and the fight. "You need to rest," he said, his voice rough. He looked at the bed, the cold, empty, guarded bed. He gently guided her to it, and she sat on the edge, too tired to protest, too tired to feel the guilt. He did not leave, he did not lie with her. He went back to the hardback chair, sat, and picked up his rifle, laying it across his lap. "I will watch," he said. Eliza looked at him, this man who had fought for her, bled for her, and who had, with a single kiss, broken the 5-year spell of her grief. She was too tired to go to the cot. She lay back on the quilt of her own bed, still fully dressed, still covered in soot. He sat in the chair, a silent, bleeding guardian. They did not talk of the fight. They did not talk of Pike. In the long hours before dawn, they just talked. She asked him about the stars, which she could see through the window. He told her their Navajo names. He told her about the land, how it breathed, how it watched. She told him about her farm back east, before Silas, before the desert. They spoke of things they had loved and things they had lost. Their voices were low, whispers in the dark. Two lonely souls finding a brief, impossible island of peace in a sea of war. For the first time in 5 years, Eliza Harper slept in her own bed. She did not dream of fire. She woke to the gray light of dawn. The room was cold. The chair was empty. She sat up, her heart pounding. He was gone. He had slipped out before the sun, before Ben, before the prying eyes of the world, to protect her reputation. The only sign he had been there at all was a single, dried drop of his blood on the wooden floor, and the faint, lingering scent of sage and smoke. Eliza stood, her body aching, her heart raw. She felt light, and she felt terrified. She had let a man into her fortress. She had let him see her at her weakest. She had let him kiss her. She walked to the window, looking out at the smoking ruins of her barn. The battle was far from over. Pike would be furious. But as she stood there, she realized something profound. The thing that was making her tremble was not the thought of Pike. It was not the thought of another man. It was the simple, terrifying, undeniable fact that, after 5 long, cold years, her heart had just started to beat again. The guarded bed was a bed once more, and the warrior who had kissed away her sorrows had, in doing so, chosen a fight far more complicated than either of them could possibly imagine. The morning after the fire, the ranch was a graveyard. The smoking ruins of the barn sent a foul-smelling plume into the clean desert air. Ben, his face pale and young, was numbly sorting through the wreckage, looking for any tools that might have survived. He found a set of harness buckles, warped and blackened, and held them up to Eliza as if they were a great treasure, his eyes hollow. But the physical destruction was not the worst of it. The true damage, Pike's real victory, was waiting in Half Moon Fork. Eliza rode into town 2 days later, needing supplies, needing to show she was not broken. The reception was a wall of cold silence. The whispers, which had once been about her stubbornness, were now sharp, poisoned darts. She walked into the general store, Mrs. Peabody, the proprietor's wife, who had once given Eliza a jar of apple preserves after Silas's death, stopped sorting calico bolts and simply stared. "I need 10 pounds of flour and a sack of salt," Eliza said, her voice steady. Mrs. Peabody did not move. "We are busy, Mrs. Harper. Perhaps you can come back." "You are standing right here, Miriam," Eliza said, her patience thin. A man at the counter, a farmer Eliza had known for years, turned. "Folks are saying you had company the night of your fire." Eliza's blood ran cold. "I was attacked." "So they say," the man sneered. "But it is funny. Ain't it Pike's man? Jed, the one who worked the North Range? He's dead, shot in the chest, and your barn burns down. But you and the boy are just fine. And now the Navajo are guarding your land. We seen 'em, up on the ridge, like buzzards." "They saved my life," Eliza said, her voice a low, dangerous growl. "Or they were paid for their trouble," Mrs. Peabody said, her voice dripping with venom. "We all know how a woman alone pays warriors for their protection. You are a disgrace to your husband's memory, a woman of bad morals." Eliza stood frozen. This was the attack Pike had planned, not with fire, but with words, with shame. She was no longer the widow Harper, an object of pity and respect. She was the Indian lover, the whore, the woman who had brought the savagery of the red man into their white, decent world. She left the store without the flour, her face burning. She walked to the saloon, hoping for one friendly face. Maggie. Maggie was there, wiping down the bar, her face a thundercloud. "Do not listen to them, Eliza," she said, her voice a low growl, not even looking up. "They are fools. Pike's got 'em all spooked. He is spreading lies." Eliza stammered. "Of course he is," Maggie said, slamming a glass down. "He lost a man. He did not get your land. So now he is poisoning the well. He's making you a pariah. And it is working." Maggie looked up, her eyes hard. "And it is not just talk. Eliza, a telegraph came in this morning. Sheriff Hayes, that weak-spined coward. He sent it to Fort Defiance." What did it say?" "He said the town was under threat. Navajo raiders," he wrote, "led by the scout Tahan Nez. He said they burned your barn as a warning, and that you were under their control. He has asked for the army. Eliza, he has asked for the blue coats to come and restore order." Eliza felt the floor tilt. Pike's plan. It was happening, just as she had heard in the alley. But it was worse. He was using Tahan's name. He was using her as the excuse. Before she could even process this, the bat-wing doors of the saloon swung open. A man in a clean blue uniform, a captain's bars on his shoulders, stood there, blocking the light. He was flanked by 2 soldiers, their rifles held at the ready. He was tall, with cold blue eyes and a neat, trimmed beard. He was not a man who looked like he could be fooled. "Which one of you?" he asked, his voice crisp and educated. "Is Mrs. Eliza Harper?" The meeting was not a meeting. It was an interrogation, held right there in the saloon. The captain, whose name was Llewellyn, had cleared the room, save for Eliza, Sheriff Hayes, and, to Eliza's surprise, Asa Pike, who sat in a corner looking like a concerned, grieving citizen. "Mrs. Harper," Captain Llewellyn said, consulting a small notebook. "I have read Sheriff Hayes's report. I find it dramatic. He claims you are a hostage to the Navajo. You do not look like a hostage to me." "I am not," Eliza said, her hands clenched in her lap. "I was attacked. My barn was burned. My man was shot. Tahan Nez and his men, they saved my life." "Tahan Nez," the captain repeated, writing in his book. The scout. Yes, we know him. A good man, once, but he has been difficult of late. He refuses to come in. He aligns himself with the hostage-takers from the Long Walk. He is considered unstable. He is not unstable, Eliza said. He is being blamed for something he did not do. Pike spoke up from the corner, his voice oozing sympathy. Captain, the woman is terrified. You can see it. They have influenced her. She is protecting them, perhaps to protect herself. I will determine that, Mr. Pike, Llewellyn said, his cold eyes silencing Pike. He turned back to Eliza. The reason I'm here is not just your barn, Mrs. Harper. It is a matter of a dead man, a man named Jedediah Stone. He worked for Mr. Pike. He was found with 2 bullet holes in him, from a rifle and a Navajo arrow in his throat. Statement. It would seem. Eliza felt a jolt. Tahan had not mentioned an arrow. Had his men done that? And then there is the matter, the captain continued, of why you are being attacked at all. Mr. Pike, in his report, suggests this is a land dispute. A dispute, he claims, that has its roots in your late husband's own actions. That is a lie, Eliza said, but the words were weak. Is it? The captain pulled a sheaf of papers from his satchel. These are Army records. Mrs. Harper, from 5 years ago. We were not at war with the Navajo, but we were and are responsible for keeping the peace. And your husband, Mr. Silas Harper, he was a known agitator. He spread a paper on the table. It was a formal report. Silas Harper, he led a group calling itself the Arizona Rangers, a civilian militia. Unauthorized, they were, according to this report, responsible for at least 3 separate raids on peaceful Navajo camps, in retaliation for supposed cattle theft. The captain's voice was a monotone, a hammer driving nails into her history. They burned lodges, they stole livestock, and on the night of July 10th, 5 years ago, they attacked a Navajo encampment near Coyote Canyon, killing 2 women and a child. Eliza stopped breathing. No. Yes, the captain said, his eyes on her. The very same night, Mrs. Harper, that your ranch was attacked and your husband and son were killed. The Army's conclusion was that the attack on your ranch was a direct and tragically predictable reprisal for your husband's own murderous actions earlier that day. The room was silent. Eliza stared at the paper. Silas, her Silas. Not just a victim, a murderer. A man who had brought the fire down on his own head and on the head of their son. He did not tell me, she whispered, the shame a physical, crushing weight. They rarely do. The new silence at Harper's Ridge was heavier than the old one. The first silence had been one of grief. This new one was born of isolation. The smoking ruin of the barn stood as a monument to her new status. She was no longer just the widow Harper. She was the woman who had brought the war to their doorstep. Asa Pike had played his hand perfectly. He had not needed to attack her again. Not with guns. His words were far more effective. Ben, her young hired hand, had come back from Half Moon Fork with a sack of flour and a look of shame. They are saying terrible things. Mrs. Harper, he reported, not meeting her eyes as he unloaded the meager supplies. They said you let that Navajo warrior stay the night, in the house. The unspoken accusation, in your bed, hung in the dry air between them. That man saved my life. Ben, Eliza said, her voice a cold, hard stone. Yes, ma'am, he'd whispered. But Pike's men are saying you paid him for it. They're calling you a woman of bad morals. The poison spread. When she rode into town herself, the streets cleared. Men turned their backs. The women in the general store, who had once offered her curt, respectful nods, now stared at her with open contempt before gathering their skirts and moving to the other side of the aisle. She was shunned. She was the leper. the traitor to her race. Pike's victory was almost complete. He had successfully cut her off from her own people, isolating her in a way no fence ever could. Tahan knew of this. He had seen it from the ridges, the way she was treated in town. He had also heard the other, more dangerous rumor, the one that had come from Sheriff Hayes's telegraph. He had met his uncle, Atsa, in the high, hidden canyons. Atsa looked older, his face etched with a new worry. "The blue coats are coming," Atsa said, his voice a dry rasp. "They are not coming to talk. They are coming because the white man, Hayes, has told them of Navajo unrest. He has used your name, Tahan. He has told them you are leading a war party." "Pike's war party," Tahan said, his voice bitter. "He burned her barn, not me." "It does not matter," Atsa said. "A white man is dead. A white woman's property is burned. They will only see one color, and it will be ours. They are sending a captain from Fort Defiance. He is to investigate. He is to make an excuse." Tahan said, "An excuse to bring the soldiers into the canyon. Pike has won." "Not yet," Atsa said, "but he is close." The investigation came to Eliza. A week after the fire, a column of blue-coated cavalry, 20 men strong, rode onto her land. They were not a rabble. They were professional, disciplined, and their presence was a new kind of terror. They were led by a captain, a man with cold blue eyes and a neatly trimmed beard, who introduced himself as Captain Llewellyn. He set up a formal meeting in her kitchen, which he had first insisted be swept. He sat at her small table, his satchel beside him. Sheriff Hayes sat in the corner, looking pale and unimportant. Asa Pike was also there, his face a mask of civic concern, a pillar of the community, here to assist the army. "Mrs. Harper," Captain Llewellyn began, his voice crisp, without emotion. He opened a notebook. "I have read Sheriff Hayes's report. It is alarming. It claims you are being coerced by a band of renegade Navajo led by our former scout, Tahan Nez. Is that true?" Eliza's hands were clasped in her lap so tightly her knuckles ached. "No, Captain, it is not. I was attacked by men who work for Mr. Pike. Tahan Nez saved my life, and my hired hand's life." Pike cleared his throat. "Captain, if I may, the poor woman is... She is not herself. She has been through a terrible trauma. It is understandable she might be confused, or even influenced. Tahan is a very persuasive man." Llewellyn's cold gaze silenced Pike. "I am not interested in your opinions, Mr. Pike. I am interested in facts, and the facts, Mrs. Harper, are complicated." He pulled a thick, folded sheaf of papers from his satchel. "You were attacked. Your barn was burned. One of Mr. Pike's employees, a man named Jedediah Stone, was killed. He was shot. He also had a Navajo arrow in his throat. A statement, it would seem." Eliza felt a jolt. Tahan had not mentioned that. "This is not," the captain continued, "a simple matter. Mr. Pike claims the Navajo are on the warpath, trying to stop his cattle trail. The Navajo, in a message from their elder, Atsa, claim Pike is trespassing and trying to start a war. And you, Mrs. Harper, are in the middle. The question is, why?" He opened the folded papers. "We keep extensive records. Mrs. Harper, we have to... Your name, your husband's name, is not new to us." He slid a document across the table. It was a formal report, dated 5 years prior. "This is an Army field report regarding the Harper incident. According to our records, your late husband, Mr. Silas Harper, was the founder and leader of an unauthorized civilian militia. He called them the Arizona Rangers." Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. "A militia, no. He was a rancher." "He was," the captain said, his voice flat. "An agitator. He and his rangers were implicated in no less than 3 separate raids on peaceful Navajo encampments, stealing livestock and In one instance, burning lodges, all in the name of retaliation for thefts he could not prove. "No," Eliza whispered. "That is a lie." "It is a sworn report from my predecessor," Llewellyn said, his voice unyielding. "And it gets worse. On the morning of October 10th, 1873, the same day your ranch was attacked, Mr. Harper and his men raided a small Navajo hunting camp near the mouth of Coyote Canyon. They burned it to the ground. Our report states 2 women and 1 child were killed in the fire." The room went silent. Eliza stared at the paper, her vision blurring. The date, the date. It was the day. The day she had lost everything. Silas was in town that morning," she whispered, her mind racing, trying to find a mistake. He said he was getting seed." "He was not in town, ma'am," the captain said, his voice softening for the first time with a note of pity. "He was leading a massacre. The Army's official conclusion was that the attack on your ranch that night was not a random act of savagery. It was a direct and tragically predictable reprisal for your husband's actions that very morning." The kitchen floor seemed to fall away. Silas, her Silas, who she had mourned, the man whose memory she had guarded, he had not been a victim. He had been the cause. He had not just died. He had gotten their son killed. I did not know," she breathed, the shame of physical, crushing weight. "They rarely do," Llewellyn said. He folded the papers. "Which is why, Mrs. Harper, your situation is so compromised. You are harboring the very people who murdered your family, even if," he added, "your husband started the fight." Eliza was numb. She did not remember the rest of the meeting. She did not remember the captain leaving, or Pike's false, sympathetic smile as he offered, again, to take this troubled land off your hands. She just sat, staring at the empty chair where the captain had been. She stumbled out of the house, into the harsh, bright sunlight, her entire history a lie. She walked, unthinking, to the creek, the only place that felt cool, the only place she could breathe. She needed Tahan. She needed to see him, to thank him for saving her, to ask him. She froze. She heard voices, low and urgent, from the cottonwood grove just upstream. She recognized them instantly. Tahan and his uncle, Atsa. She crept closer, hidden by the willows, her heart a cold stone. "You must not see her again," Atsa was saying in their language, his voice firm. "She is a white woman. Her world has poisoned her. She is not them." Tahan's voice was low, pained. She is different. She is the wife of the man." Atsa's voice rose. "Have you forgotten? Have you forgotten that night, the smell of our lodges burning, the cries?" There was a long, terrible silence. When Tahan spoke, his voice was a raw wound. "I have forgotten nothing. I was there, Uncle. I was the one who found Hastian's sister and the child after the Rangers left. And you were there later," Atsa said, his voice quieter. "When the white man's wagon train came, the one with the hawk banner, the one Harper was guarding." "Yes," Tahan said, "I was there." "And you, Tahan Nez, a warrior of the Dine, you—" "I killed him," Tahan said, his voice flat, dead. "I put an arrow in the man who led them, the man with the hawk on his rifle, the man who had burned our lodges that morning. I did not know his name. I only knew his mark. I chose to stop his hand." Eliza clamped her hand over her mouth to stop her own scream. The world, which had just been fractured, now shattered completely. The man who had kissed her, the man who had held her while she wept, the man who had sat in her bedroom and shared his soul. He was the one. She stepped out from the willows. Her legs were shaking, but she did not fall. She walked, one heavy step at a time, until she stood in the clearing before them. Atsa looked at her with a profound, sad wisdom. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the stones, leaving them alone. Tahan did not move. He stood, his face a mask of iron. But his eyes were full of a terrible, shared destiny. He had known this moment would come. Eliza looked at him. The man she had allowed into her heart. The man who had brought her back to life. "The man you killed," she said, her voice a stranger to her. A dry, dead rustle. "The one with the hawk mark. It was him, wasn't it?" Tahan held her gaze. He would not lie to her. Not now. Not ever. "Yes." The word was a bullet. It struck her, and for a moment, she could not breathe. You were there. You and Silas." "He was not Silas to me," Tahan said, his voice quiet, but steel. "He was the man who had burned our camp. He was the man who had shot at women and children. He was a raider, a murderer, and he was leading another wagon train of rifles onto our land. I chose to stop his hand. The truth was a brutal, ugly thing. Silas, her husband, the murderer. Tahan, her savior, the executioner." "Sammy," she whispered, the name a prayer and a curse. "My son, he was in the wagon. He was just a boy." Tahan's face broke, just for a second. The iron mask cracked, revealing a torment she had not seen, a guilt that went beyond the killing of a man. "I did not know. By the holy people, Eliza, I did not know there was a child. The fight, it was chaos. The wagons were burning. We were just trying to stop them." "Stop them!" she screamed, the sound tearing from her throat, a raw, primal wail of 5 years of suppressed rage and grief. "You murdered them. You took my family." The accusation hung in the air, vibrating. Tahan did not flinch. His face settled back into those hard, pained lines. He looked at her, his eyes holding a grief as deep as her own, but as old as the mountains. "Your family," he said, his voice soft, but with a core of unbreakable truth, "was taken first." That was it, the line drawn, the two worlds, his and hers, colliding in one unbearable, impossible truth. He was right, she was right. They were both victims. They were both perpetrators. She looked at him, the man who had kissed away her sorrows, and she saw only the man who had caused them. "Get out," she whispered, the words shaking with a cold, pure hatred. "Eliza," he stepped toward her, his hand outstretched. "Shh, get off my land," she shrieked, her hands balled into fists. "Do not come back. Do not ever come back. You monster!" The word hit him harder than a bullet. He stopped, his hand falling to his side. He looked at her for a long moment. His heart, the one he had so foolishly, so dangerously, allowed to open, breaking. He had told the truth, and it had cost him the only person who had ever seen him as a man, not a symbol. He turned, without a word, and walked away. He did not run. He did not look back. He just walked, up the creek, and disappeared into the rocks, a ghost returning to the shadows. Eliza stood, shaking, until he was gone. Then her legs gave out, and she sank to the ground, the sound of the running water a mockery of the tears that would not come. That night, for the first time since the fire, Eliza Harper did not weep. She went into her house, her face a mask of cold stone. She walked to the bedroom, her bedroom, the one that had just begun to feel like a living space again. She closed the door. She turned the key. The sound of the lock clicking into place was the sound of a tomb being sealed. She had been wrong. She had been a fool. She had let a warrior in, and he had been a warrior all along. She had traded one ghost for another, and this time, she knew she would never be free. The heart of Coyote Canyon was a scene from hell. The storm, which had been threatening for days, was now a physical, wailing entity. Wind and sand howled between the high stone walls. creating a vortex that tore at the land and sky. The world was a churning, brown chaos, lit only by the infrequent, violent flashes of lightning. Eliza rode Bess into the canyon's mouth, her head down, her slicker pulled tight. She was not thinking, only moving, driven by a cold, ragged fury. She followed the panicked bellowing of her stolen cattle, the tracks already vanishing in the driving rain. She rounded a sharp bend, and the sound of the storm was suddenly joined by the sound of men's voices. When she looked up, it was too late. She was not in an empty canyon. She was in an arena. Her small herd was huddled against a rock slide, but she was surrounded. Asa Pike sat on his large black horse, his long oilskin coat making him look like a dark, impervious god. His riders, a dozen of them, were arrayed in a half circle, their rifles out, their faces hidden by the storm. But they were not alone. Huddled near the canyon wall, his horse shifting nervously, was Sheriff Tom Hayes. With him were 3 other men from Half Moon Fork, ranchers, their faces pale and terrified. Witnesses. Well, Mrs. Harper. Pike's voice was a triumphant roar over the wind. So glad you could join us. I was afraid you might miss the end. 2 of his men grabbed Bess's bridle. Eliza reached for her rifle, but she was too slow. One of them, a big man, backhanded her across the face. She fell from the saddle, landing hard in the mud. They dragged her to her feet, her lips splitting, the taste of blood and sand in her mouth. You are a fool, Asa, she spat, the words torn from her. The army, they will see what you are. The army, Pike laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. The army sees what I tell them to see. Captain Llewellyn is a practical man. He is waiting at the mouth of the canyon right now, securing it. He is waiting for my report. They dragged her, fighting, toward the edge of a sheer drop, a cliff that fell 200 feet to the rocky canyon floor. They tied her hands behind her back. She was on her knees, the wind tearing at her hair. My report, Pike yelled, turning to his terrified witnesses. Will say that the Navajo, in their rage, have taken a white woman hostage, that they have killed her, a tragedy, an act of war that must be answered. And you, gentlemen, you will be my witnesses. You will sign the report. You will attest to the savagery you saw here today. Tom Hayes looked at the woman on her knees, at the dozen rifles, at the sheer drop. He looked at his own shaking hands. Asa, this is murder. This is progress. Tom, Pike sneered. Now, I am going to give her one last chance, a chance to cleanse her soul. He dismounted, his boots sinking into the mud. He walked to Eliza, grabbed her by the hair, and yanked her head back, forcing her to look up at him. Tell them, he screamed into her face. Confess. Tell them your husband was a criminal. Tell them you turned your back on your own kind, that you slept with a savage. Tell them the Indians are to blame for all of it. Confess, and I will. I will make your death quick. This was it, the final humiliation. He wanted her to die, but first, he wanted her to validate his lie. Eliza stopped struggling. She looked past Pike's furious face. She looked at Tom Hayes, at the other ranchers, their eyes wide with fear. She saw, in their terrified silence, the weakness that had allowed this to happen. She saw her whole, broken life, the lies she had believed, the truths she had ignored. She took a deep, shuddering breath. In the heart of the storm, a strange, breathless calm settled over her. The wind itself seemed to pause, listening. He is right, she said, her voice clear, carrying in the sudden silence. Pike smiled, a flash of white teeth. Go on. My husband, Eliza said, her voice growing stronger, finding its root in the stone beneath her. Silas Harper. He was part of a raid. He and his men, they burned a Navajo camp. They killed women and children. It is true. The ranchers, even Hayes, looked stunned. Pike's smile widened. He had her. And the attack on my ranch, Eliza continued, the words like stones, tearing her throat. It was revenge. My son died, because of a war my husband started. You hear that, gentlemen? Pike roared, turning to the crowd, his victory complete. She admits it, the savages are to blame. No. The word was quiet, but it was absolute. Eliza looked up, her eyes, no longer afraid, but burning with a fire that dwarfed the storm, locking with Pike's. He is to blame. She jerked her chin at Pike. This is not about my husband. This is not about the Navajo. This is about greed. This is about this canyon. He wants it. He wants the water. He wants the railroad. He tried to burn my ranch. He murdered his own man. Jedediah. To blame Tahan Nez. He is the only savage here. The truth, all of it, laid bare. Pike's face contorted in a mask of pure, murderous fury. He had lost control. He drew his pistol, his hand shaking with rage. You lying bitch! He turned to the man standing directly behind Eliza. Shoot her! Shoot her in the back now! The man, his face hidden by his slicker, raised his rifle. A sound, not of the storm, but of a man. A single, high, piercing cry from the cliffs above. No. Tahan Nez, a specter in the storm, launched himself from an overhanging ledge. He had been there all along. He and 4 warriors, moving like water through the rocks, using Pike's own tactics, waiting, watching. He fell, not on Pike, but on Eliza. He was a human shield. He hit her hard, knocking her flat to the mud, covering her body with his own, just as the riflemen fired. The bullet, meant for her back, tore through Tahan's side. Eliza heard the sickening, wet thud of the impact, felt the spray of his blood on her face. He cried out, a sharp, ragged sound of pain, his whole body arching into hers. Tahan! She screamed, trapped beneath him. Chaos erupted. Tahan's warriors, from 3 different positions on the cliffs, opened fire. It was not a wild volley. It was a precise, disciplined assault. They did not fire at the ranchers. They did not fire at the sheriff. They fired at Pike's men. A horse went down, screaming. A man's rifle was shot from his hands. Another man clutched his shoulder, falling from his saddle. Kill them all, Pike was screaming, his pistol firing wildly, uselessly, into the rocks. Tahan rolled off Eliza, his face a mask of agony. Stay down, he grunted, pushing her toward a small crevice in the rock. He clamped one hand to his side, where blood was already pouring through his fingers, dark and hot, mixing with the rain and mud. He rose, his own rifle in his hand, and faced Asa Pike. The 2 men stood, 20 feet apart, the storm raging around them, the battle momentarily freezing, the warrior and the banker, the man of the land and the man who only wanted to own it. It is over, Pike, Tahan said, his voice strained, his rifle held low. It is over for you, you red bastard, Pike snarled, raising his pistol, his hand shaking. Pike fired. Tahan, wounded, his movements a half-second slow, dived, the bullet clipping the air where he had been. Tahan's own rifle was empty. He had used his shots to give his men covering fire. Pike laughed, a high, unhinged sound. He advanced, his pistol aimed. You see, I always win. The money always wins. You are dead. He was standing on the very edge of the cliff, on the loose scree of the path, now a river of mud from the storm. Pike, no, Sheriff Hayes yelled. Finally, drawing his own gun. But he was too far. It was not the sheriff who stopped him. It was not Tahan. It was the land. A deafening crack of thunder, so close it shook the canyon walls. It was not thunder. It was the rock, the storm, the bullets, the concussion. It was too much. The ledge of rock that Pike was standing on, the very edge of the cliff he coveted, groaned. It shuddered. Pike's eyes went wide. He looked down. The ground beneath his feet was moving. "No," he whispered, his arrogance vanishing, replaced by a pure, animal terror. He tried to scramble back, his boots slipping in the mud, but it was too late. With a great, tearing, grinding sound, the entire lip of the cliff gave way. The land itself, which he had tried to cut, to chain, to sell, had finally answered. The rockslide was small, but absolute. Asa Pike, his eyes wide, his mouth open in a silent "oh," did not fall. He vanished. The earth opened up and swallowed him, taking him down into the darkness. His pistol, his plans, and his greed, all gone. The canyon was silent. The storm itself seemed to hold its breath. Pike's remaining riders, their leader gone, threw down their guns. Sheriff Tom Hayes sat on his horse, shaking. He looked at the surrendered riders. He looked at the Navajo warriors, who were now appearing on the rocks, their rifles held low. He looked at the spot where Pike had been. He holstered his pistol. It is over," he said, his voice hoarse. "Asa Pike is dead. By an act of God." He looked at Tahan, who was leaning heavily against a boulder, his hand pressed to his bleeding side. I will be writing in my report that Asa Pike was the aggressor, that he organized an attack on Mrs. Harper and on the Navajo, and that Tahan Nez and his men acted in defense of this community." Tahan looked at Eliza. His face was a mask of pain. He had heard her confession. He had heard her truth. He nodded, once, a profound acknowledgement. Then his legs, which had held him up through sheer will, finally buckled. He collapsed to the muddy ground. Eliza, her hands still tied, scrambled to him. "Tahan!" She knelt beside him, helpless. "Ben Maggie, someone cut me loose." Sheriff Hayes, fumbling, ran over and cut her bonds. She pushed her hair out of her face, her hands, now free, immediately going to the wound in his side. It was bad. So much blood. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking, the tears finally coming, mixing with the rain and his blood. "No, do not you dare!" She looked at his face, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow. She grabbed his hand, the one that had held his rifle, the one that had touched her face. She held it, pressing it to her cheek. "Do not make me a widow again." The storm broke with the dawn. The wind, which had shrieked like a banshee, died to a mournful whisper, and the driving sand settled, leaving the world scoured, new and painfully clear. The first light found Harper's Ridge, but the tableau was not one of despair. It was one of quiet, determined work. Tahan Nez lay on Eliza's bed, not on the cot in the kitchen, not on a pallet on the floor, but in the center of the bed he had, in a way, helped her reclaim. He was pale, his skin clammy with fever, his breath shallow. The bullet had gone through his side, missing his vitals by a miracle, but he had lost a great deal of blood. The bedroom, once a dusty, sealed tomb, was now a flurry of quiet, purposeful activity. The door was wide open, letting in the clean, rain-washed morning air. Eliza was there, her face streaked with mud and Tahan's blood, her eyes red-rimmed but fiercely focused. She was not a weeping widow. She was a nurse. She was a woman with a purpose. Ben was there, his youthful terror from the previous night replaced with a sober, adult resolve. He was holding a steaming kettle of water, his eyes fixed on Tahan with a kind of awe. And Maggie was there. She had ridden out at first light, having heard the rumors from the terrified ranchers who had fled the canyon. She had arrived, taken one look at the bloody scene, at Eliza, at the wounded warrior in the bed, and had simply rolled up her sleeves. "Well," Maggie had said, her voice a low rumble, "it seems you went and complicated things. Eliza," but there was no judgment in it, only a deep, abiding acceptance. She was the one tearing strips of clean linen for bandages. The door was open. Ben and Maggie knew. The town would know. The secret, the shame, the fear, it had all been burned away in the canyon. All that was left was the truth. And the truth was lying in her bed, fighting for his life. The news of Pike's death and the truth of his plot rolled into Half Moon Fork with the returning, shame-faced witnesses, Sheriff Tom Hayes and the other ranchers, having seen Pike's end and Tahan's sacrifice, could not contain the story. It was too big, too explosive. The town, which had so recently shunned Eliza, was thrown into a state of profound shock. They were forced to re-examine everything. Asa Pike, the man of progress, the bringer of prosperity, was a fraud, a monster, a man who had tried to start a war, who had murdered his own men, all for a cattle trail. And the Navajo, the savages, the raiders, they were the ones who had been protecting the town from the real threat. Tahan Nez, the man they had scorned as a renegade, had taken a bullet meant for a white woman. The cognitive dissonance was almost too much. People gathered on the street corners, not in angry mobs, but in small, confused, whispering knots. They were forced to look at their own prejudice, their own fear, and see how Pike had played them, had used their worst impulses against them. Captain Llewellyn, the army officer, was furious. Not at the Navajo, but at being duped. He, his soldiers, and his authority had been used as a pawn in Pike's murderous game. He rode into town from the mouth of the canyon, his face a mask of cold, military rage, and found Sheriff Tom Hayes. A new meeting was called, this time in the daylight, in the shell of the half-built railroad office, the very symbol of Pike's false promises. This time, it was not a meeting of progress. It was a reckoning. Captain Llewellyn stood at the front, his report book in his hand. "Let us be clear," he said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Mr. Asa Pike was not a businessman. He was a conspirator. He attempted to incite a war to defraud the United States government and the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad. His death was a direct result of his own criminal actions." He looked at the pale, shaken faces. "The United States Army," he said, "is not in the business of stealing land for corporations. The Coyote Canyon project is hereby declared null and void, pending a full investigation into its fraudulent origins." A gasp went up. The railroad, the money, the jobs. It was all gone, but in its place was a strange, unsettling relief. Sheriff Tom Hayes, his face ashen, his hands shaking, stood up. He looked, for the first time, like a man who understood the weight of his badge. I was a fool," Hayes said, his voice cracking. "I was a coward. I listened to Pike. I sent the telegraph that brought you here. Captain, I called Tahan Nez a raider. I was wrong. He and Mrs. Harper, they are the only reason we are not all digging graves for a war Pike started." He looked at the crowd. "The matter of the water in Coyote Canyon, it remains, but it will not be settled by blood. I am proposing a new agreement, a compact, between this town and the Navajo, a legal, binding compact for sharing the water." It was a revolutionary idea, born of shame and terror, but it was there. Then a voice came from the back of the room. "And I have something to say." Eliza Harper walked in. She was not wearing her good dress. She was still in her ranch clothes, stained with mud and blood, her hair pulled back in a simple, severe knot. She had left Maggie and Ben to watch Tahan. She looked exhausted, and she looked 10 feet tall. The room parted for her. The women who had scorned her, the men who had turned their backs, now could not meet her gaze. She stood at the front, next to the sheriff, and she looked at them all, her gaze unflinching. "I am not here to ask for your pity," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying in the dead silence. "I am here to ask for your forgiveness and to offer my own. The crowd stared, confused. "For 5 years," Eliza said, "I have lived among you as a victim. I was the widow Harper. I guarded my grief, and I guarded my hate, and my hate. It was aimed at the wrong people. I hated the Indians. I blamed them. I blamed them for the fire. I blamed them for the death of my husband and my son." She took a shaky breath, but her voice did not break. "I was wrong. I was a fool, and my ignorance almost cost us all. The truth is always more complicated." She looked at the faces. Mrs. Peabody, the farmers. "My husband, Silas Harper, was not a victim. He was a raider. He took part in a massacre. He killed women and children. And the fire at my ranch. It was not a raid. It was revenge." She said it, aloud, to the world. The shame was a fire in her belly, but the truth, she realized, was a cleansing one. "I did not know," she said, her voice softening. "But that is no excuse. I let my fear and my hate blind me. I helped men like Asa Pike. Because I made it easy for him. I let him use my story as a weapon." She finished, her gaze finding Captain Llewellyn. "Tahan Nez, he did not kill my family as a savage. He did it as a soldier, in a war my husband started. And yesterday, he saved my life. He took a bullet that was meant for me. I ask that this town and the army see him not as a renegade, but as the man who stopped this war, not started it." She turned and walked out. She did not wait for their applause or their judgment. She had said her piece. She had to get back to her ranch. She had to get back to him. 1 year passed. The land, which had been scarred by fire and blood, began to heal. The desert has a long memory, but it also has a profound capacity for new life. 2 years passed. Harper's Ridge was no longer a fortress. The smoking ruin of the barn had been cleared, and in its place, a new, larger structure stood, built of fresh pine and stubborn hope. It had been raised not by Eliza alone, but by a strange collection of hands. Ben, who was now a tall man of 19 with a quiet confidence and a new wife in town, Maggie, who had bullied the men in Half Moon Fork for lumber, and 2 of Tahan's nephews, who had showed up one day, unannounced, and had simply started working, sharing a silent, respectful language of hammers and saws with Ben. The biggest change, however, was the sound. Harper's Ridge, once a bastion of widow's silence, was now filled with the noise of children. A small, sturdy building, half bunkhouse, half school, had been built near the creek, in the shade of the cottonwoods. It was not much, but it was the most important building for 100 miles. Inside, on a bright autumn morning, Eliza stood before a collection of pupils that would have given Mrs. Peabody a heart attack 2 years prior. There were 6 children. 3 were white, the sons and daughters of a few brave homesteaders who had, after Pike's fall and the signing of the Water Compact, come to believe in the new peace. 3 were Navajo, shy and dark-eyed, who had ridden in on ponies from the high mesas, sent by Atsa. Eliza was at the slate, drawing letters. "This," she said, her voice clear and warm, "is a W. It stands for water. It stands for we." In the other corner, an older Navajo woman, Tahan's aunt, sat on a blanket, showing 2 of the white children how to grind corn with a medite, her hands moving in a patient, ancient rhythm, their shared laughter a new, sweet sound. The door was open, and leaning against the frame was Tahan Nez. He was no longer a shadow. He was no longer a ghost haunting the hills. The Army, on Captain Llewellyn's formal recommendation, had officially cleared his name, labeling him a friend of the peace. He was, in fact, the most important man in the territory. He was the bridge. He spent his days negotiating, translating not just words, but worlds. He moved between the Navajo camp the town of Half Moon Fork, and the ranch, ensuring the water compact was honored, settling the small disputes that flared up, and, in the process, becoming the most respected, and perhaps most feared, honest man in Arizona. He was not wearing buckskins today, but a simple linen shirt and denim trousers, his shoulders strong where she had stitched it. He watched Eliza, a small, quiet smile touching his lips. When the lessons were done, the children scattered, their shouts mixing in two languages as they ran to the creek. Eliza came out, wiping chalk from her hands, and walked to him. The gesture easy, familiar, essential. "Atsa is pleased," Tahan said, his voice the low rumble she had come to associate with safety. "The water levels are high. He said the compact is working. He also said the young men are restless, but he will handle them." "And you," she said, looking up at him, her eyes clear, the old shadows of grief replaced by the light of a new day. "Are you pleased?" "I am here," he said, which, for him, was a profound statement. He took the slate from her hands. "It is a good day. Ben is bringing the last of the hay in." "It is," she agreed, her hand resting on his arm. "But it is also the day—" He nodded. He knew. That evening, as the sun began to bleed gold and purple across the high mesas, a small group gathered on the porch of the main house. It was not a party. It was a witnessing. Maggie was there, a bright blue shawl around her massive shoulders, her face for once devoid of its usual scowl, replaced by a soft, maternal pride. Ben was there, standing awkwardly with his hat in his hands, and from the rocks, Atsa had come, along with Hastian, the young warrior, his face no longer angry, but marked with a deep, quiet respect. As the last light touched the valley, Tahan stepped forward. He did not make a speech. He carried no white man's paper. He held, instead, a heavy, woven blanket. It was beautiful, dyed in the rich colors of the earth, ochre, black, and a deep, startling blue. The patterns of his clan woven into its very fiber. He did not hand it to her. In accordance with the tradition of his people, he laid it, respectfully, on the threshold of her door. The offer, the commitment. Eliza's heart was so full it ached. She looked at this man, who had seen her at her ugliest, who had shared her deepest shame, and who had returned from an exile she had forced upon him, taking a bullet to save her life. She stepped forward. She did not hesitate. She bent, her hands touching the rich wool, and she lifted the blanket. Then she turned, and with the eyes of both their worlds upon them, she opened the blanket wide and wrapped it, not just around herself, but around him, pulling him close until they stood together, sharing the warmth, encased in a single promise. She looked up at him. "Yes," she whispered, a word only he could hear. Atsa nodded, a slow, solemn approval. Maggie, for the first time in recorded history, dabbed at her eyes. Later that night, the house was quiet. The door to the bedroom was open. It had not been locked in over a year. Tahan was there, Eliza was there, and they were, together, setting their house in order. This was the final step, the true healing of the past. Eliza walked to the dresser. From the bottom drawer, she pulled out a small, silver-framed daguerreotype. It was Silas, and beside him, a small, blurred image of a laughing child. Sammy, her first family, her first broken life. Tahan watched her. He did not move. His face was unreadable, but his eyes held the memory of the canyon, the confession, the pain. Eliza looked at the photo. The old, sharp sting of hatred was gone, replaced by a deep, profound sorrow, a pity for the weak man her husband had been, and a love for the child they had lost. She did not hide it. She did not burn it. She placed it, gently, on the top of the dresser, in a place of honor, but also of peace. Tahan then walked to the small table by the bed. He reached into his own pocket and pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden horse, a toy his nephew had made for him. He placed it, gently, next to the silver frame. The old and the new, the past and the future, not in conflict, but side by side. Eliza looked at the two objects, the symbol of her grief and the symbol of his hope, and she finally felt whole. The room was no longer a tomb. It was a home. She turned to him. He was watching her. His love a quiet, steady thing, as real as the mountains. He held out his hand. She took it. He did not kiss away her sorrows this time. Her sorrows were part of her, just as his were part of him. Instead, he kissed her with the promise of all their tomorrows. The bed they shared that night, covered by the clan blanket, was not a place of ghosts. It was the foundation of a new life, built on truth, forgiveness, and a love that was brave enough to heal. Eliza often wrote in her journal. The next day, as she watched the children play, she sat on the porch, Tahan whittling nearby. She wrote about the town, about the school, and then she wrote a final line, a summary of her own, small, hard-won piece of the West. She wrote of a widow who had once locked her bedroom door, terrified that love would only bring loss. She had guarded her bed for years, burying her heart in a cold, empty room, until a Navajo warrior had come, not to conquer, but to listen. A man who had seen her broken, and who, instead of running, had simply stayed, winter after winter, until she was ready to unlock the door herself. Tahan looked up from his carving, his eyes finding hers. He glanced out at Coyote Canyon. It was no longer a border. It was a shared pasture. Their cattle and the Navajo herds grazed together by the stream. When this land needs us to stand, we will stand, Tahan said, his voice low, his hand finding hers. But today, it only needs us to live well. Eliza looked at their joined hands, his dark, hers pale, and she smiled, leaning her head on his strong, healed shoulder. That night, the sun set, painting the high cliffs in a blaze of red and gold. On Harper's Ridge, a single lamp glowed in the bedroom window. The door to the room, visible from the yard, closed gently. Not to keep the world out, but to keep the laughter, the whispers, and the small promises of a new family safe within. The West was still wild, but it was no longer quite so lonesome. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I truly appreciate you spending your time with Eliza and Tahan. Let me know in the comments where you are listening from. I would love to hear from you and share our thoughts. Please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales, and give this video a like. And if you really enjoyed it, hit that hype button to help this story reach even more listeners.